I'll take off that background blur so I don't accidentally blur out April. We're going to be sharing a computer because the Wi-Fi is not working so well in the building at the moment. So our apologies for this being not quite the choreography we had planned, but we'll work with it. We're professionals.
Great.
So,
yep. So kia ora koutou. I'll just kick things off. And first, I want to say welcome to everyone. This is the first of what we run as monthly seminars at the Otago Energy Research Center. And so I'm really pleased that we're able to kick off our year in partnership with Brands and Vicky, so that we were able to coordinate the speakers for today. I'll pass it off to Vicky from Brands, who will do the introductions. And what's just in terms of sort of informing everyone, we are recording this and it will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you think of someone that you that would benefit from hearing today's talk, you can direct them to the YouTube channel sometime in the future. Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, everyone, and great to see so many here today. I've been really looking forward to this presentation. As Sean said, my name's Vicky White. I'm a senior research scientist at Brands in the building performance team, and I have the pleasure of introducing April and Sophie. So April Muirden is the Principal Partnerships Officer and former manager of the Residential Efficiency Scorecard team at the Department of Energy, Environment and Planning, State Government of Victoria. Under April's leadership, the scorecard team developed and implemented the first Australian home energy performance rating program for existing and new homes. Scorecard has been publicly available in Victoria since 2017 and across Australia since 2021. We had the pleasure of meeting with the scorecard team back in early 2021, and this introduction related to a study that we're currently doing at Brands called the Household Energy End Use Project 2, or HEAP 2, which hopefully some of you online will have heard of. At that time, we were in the process of developing our data collection tools for the study. This included a requirement to collect detailed and robust data on the physical characteristics of the dwelling related to its thermal performance, and with an end goal of being able to model energy requirements. Through conversations with the scorecard team, we collectively identified parallels in the data requirements of the scorecard and those of HEAP 2, and then an exciting opportunity to collaborate and learn from each other's experiences. So whilst HEAP 2 and the scorecard differ in their scope, one being a national household energy study, the other a home assessment tool to support retrofit and research, ultimately the two programs of work are striving for the same things: improving the efficiency and energy performance of our homes, delivering better social and environmental outcomes, and having reliable, robust data to facilitate change and monitor impact. April and her team have been incredibly supportive in working with us at Brands to discuss our approaches to data collection and the potential to test a scorecard type assessment on our HEAP 2 dataset when it matures, and for which we're very grateful. It's fantastic to hear the scorecard going from strength to strength, a success that is very much a reflection of the commitment, dedication, perseverance, and expertise of the team. We're thrilled to have them join us today and share some of their learning and experience on developing and delivering the Residential Efficiency Scorecard in Australia. Over to you, April and Sophie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Sean. Do tell me if you can't hear us. We do have slight network problems because it's raining today, I think. Okay, so the key to improving home performance at scale, the Residential Efficiency Scorecard. We are going to cover quite a few things today, which we'll start with why the scorecard is developed, and then go through a few items which are identified on that table of contents. The major thing I think to recall at this point is there's a myriad of ways the scorecard is used. So we're really going to be only scratching the surface for you today. There's been a lot of work and there's a lot of detail below the lid. So we'll give you a bit of a broad overview, and then if there's something that's particularly interesting, save it to the questions at the end of the presentation, or indeed we're happy to come back and dig into some of these topics in greater depth in future presentations if that's what is needed. So we'll jump into why the scorecard was developed. So no surprises to anybody on the line today. Homes are often poorly performing, uncomfortable in hot weather, cold weather, high energy bills, high emissions. We also know solutions are complex and people often, mostly, don't know where to go for the right advice. And they do need trusted ratings and comparisons to act. And this is according to the published literature. And we kind of know this. It's like buying a used car. So if you don't trust the used car salesman who said this was owned by one granny who never used it, which we never do, we don't pay the premium. So it's just like that for houses. Unless you can trust the ratings you get, people simply are not confident to act or not confident to upgrade the home with that expensive upgrade because they're not sure if they're just being sold something. So what did we actually develop to solve this problem? We looked at the best research and developed the Residential Efficiency Scorecard. Now, this is now a nationally endorsed across Australia home energy ratings program, which covers both new and existing homes. It provides a comparable rating, which is based on cost, because that's what people are seeking. Plus, we have ratings for comfort, emissions, and features that drive cost. It is delivered by accredited assessors with strict quality controls, and householders are actually provided with tailored advice which meets their particular needs on how to reduce their energy cost and improve the home comfort. There's a focus on fixed assets because that's what causes pain over time and is very hard for people to upgrade without having good advice. So how did we get to the scorecard? Well, there's a skilled team behind this with a depth of experience. Small, so don't think there's 50 people sitting behind this. On average, maybe 5 or 6 people have developed this program from scratch, but with some very deep experience that's critical for each of the key areas. There was extensive, we don't assume we know everything, so there's extensive research, policy analysis, and cost benefit analysis to see what was the best bang for buck. And each part of the program was tested in the field with real people to see what we could find out. It's not just theoretical. And lots of consultation with a broad range of stakeholders, probably the usual suspects, but also those who are often somewhat opposed to energy efficiency. We brought them into the tent to see what they could tell us about what they were seeking and what the problems they could see. So having done all of this, this showed a clear need that we needed repeatable and accurate assessments, relatively complex and well-justified algorithms to deliver this. We needed transparency, so we needed to publish things, not just say, trust us. Very important, the tool to collect data had to be easy to use in the field, allowing the data to be collected with speed and accuracy, with standardization so that everyone collects the same data, and a formal certificate and overall star rating. Assessors had to be trained and accredited. So very important, technical, but also safety and householder skills, which are often overlooked. It's not just about collecting the right data, it's actually talking to real people. We also found we had to develop a real exam in a real house with real householders to see whether assessors really had these skills. We found that it's important to declare conflicts of interest, ensure householders' privacy is protected, audit assessors for all of these things, and make sure that there is a penalty for assessors that do not perform. It also showed there was a clear need for trustworthy data, that this could support policy and programs. So it had to be objective data, not subjective, accurate, useful, protected, so collected on a government database with privacy protected and disaster protected IT. It had to be available to researchers and policymakers. No point collecting data if people can't access it. And our setup allowed for bespoke queries. So we haven't got just a big mass of data. There's a lot of data in there, but we can set up specific queries to extract specific data for specific research. There's also allows for consistent program evaluation. So if every assessment's on one database, it's beautiful for evaluation. It is also excellent for baselining the housing stock in Australia. It's a massive growing database. So it's the largest database of residential energy, home energy performance data collected in homes by skilled assessors. So that was a quick overview. What's some key facts, given this program is now national across Australia? In 2023, we were up to 7,600 assessments, I think, since release in 2027. We have 114 assessors across Australia. In Victoria, so second largest state by population in Australia, we have an incentive coming in for scorecard assessments, which government recognises how important ratings are. An incentive will be introduced in a few months' time, which will make assessments very cheap or possibly free in Victoria. It's also being used, so the ratings are being used by banks and financiers to reduce mortgages, and businesses are advertising properties with high star ratings, and so are some real estate agents, showing how high performance is of value to these stakeholders. Also really important is what does the public say? All very well what policymakers say, it's all about the public. So we regularly survey everybody who has an assessment by independent phone surveys. We find regular feedback is very consistent. So 91% of our customers were extremely or very satisfied with a scorecard assessment process or program. Large numbers had undertaken upgrades. They often either had taken them or were intending to take them. More than 50% had higher comfort after upgrades. Now, interestingly, 24% said they decreased their energy consumption, which might sound a bit low, but then again, 50% of people don't ever check their bill, so they couldn't answer that question. So we can expect a lot more had lower energy consumption, and 88% understood energy efficiency better after their assessment. There's some other key facts of interest. So as we said, there's a myriad of ways the scorecard can be used because it's an objective rating tool. So here's some ways that our stakeholders have used the scorecard in Australia. So very commonly to reach carbon reduction goals, to reduce household energy bills, to promote moving houses off other fuels onto electricity because that is a more renewable source, and to avoid maladaptation, which is a new issue where we're trying to avoid installing appliances like gas appliances that may soon need to be taken out due to transition of gas. It's been used to support regional communities to improve their housing stock, transition of wood as a fuel, often for air quality problems, improve the health and financial situation of the vulnerable, improve public housing, and heatwave resilience. And these are just some of the projects that we've seen the scorecard used for. When we've looked across the use of the scorecard, these are the 5 areas where improving your home rating will deliver multiple benefits. So scorecard rating and then upgrading that rating will improve all of these 5 things, not just one. And it's important not to overlook the fact that sometimes we look at one and say, okay, improve cost of living will reduce your power bill, but we found incredibly important not to undervalue the health benefits of a better performing house, the comfort benefits, the emission reductions, and the resilience to extreme weather. And we'll dig into these very briefly in further slides. So scorecard is about solutions at scale. I think we're all over the little tiny pilots that go nowhere. What we really need to do is move our building stock from its currently poor performance en masse to, as quickly as feasible, to better performance en masse. You know, a few buildings in the corner are really not going to get us anywhere. So the scorecard, what does it do to get this scale issue resolved? So certainly it the whole objective is from scorecard is to get action at scale. When we have quantified and objective understanding of the building stock, broadly, we can make better decisions broadly. We know that houses make a contribution, massive contribution to carbon targets. So we're all trying to meet those. And if we have these rating tools like scorecard that delivering a consistent objective scale, then programs that use them cost less to deliver, are more coordinated and much more easy to evaluate. So we can go from little programs, little pilots that are not comparable to make sure everything is a step up in learnings and can reach the next level of delivery. We've also found home upgrades and rating tools. So knowing a rating and improving it can lower the health budget, reduce energy costs, and as we upgrade at scale, we have a lot less power grid stress and the risk of blackouts, and we can avoid mass maladaptation in home upgrades. So those projects that are accidentally installing gas appliances and in a few years' time may have to uninstall them. So there's some really exciting emerging opportunities with the scorecard. So just giving you a flavour of some of the things that are potential from the scorecard. So the scorecard is currently voluntary in Australia. However, it is under consideration to support mandatory, so legislated requirements. This could be advertising ratings at point of sale and lease, minimum rental standards. Scorecard is also part of a resilience project to develop a single home assessment tool and assessor accreditation for 5 key resilience risks. And this does include energy efficiency. Also, scorecard has been used in a plethora of research. One of the most exciting ones is the Healthy Homes program, where we were fast followers of New Zealand, in fact. We can stop quoting, well, we can continue to quote the core New Zealand research on health and energy efficiency, but now we've got some Australian research that shows $887 per person was saved over 3 months in one winter by upgrading homes. They're on average upgraded by 1 scorecard star. Lovely data out of that report, well worth a read. It's published. You can see the reference at the bottom there. And there's some really interesting facts. For example, householders were 49% less likely to go to bed early after an upgrade to keep warm. So can you imagine how bad those homes were that people are going to bed early to keep warm? So I'm going to really skim over some depth of the scorecard. We won't go into any detail here. So just give you a flavour of some of how it works and some of, if you like, the engine under the lid. So how does it work? Well, householders ring up a scorecard assessor, book a home visit. The assessor enters the key data into the scorecard tool, provides feedback to the householder, having asked the householder what they are really looking for, and they get a formal certificate in the email, once that rating is fully validated by the assessor. The scorecard assessment focuses on the fixed assets of the home. I won't go into those, you know what they are. The interesting one to note that is often skimmed over by rating tools is draft proofing. We have drafty homes. I suspect New Zealand has drafty homes. Scorecard assessors are trained to add in the draftiness. Many tools don't do that. Cheap win, critically important. But you can see up there, you can review this later, of all the things you'd expect for a tool that focuses on fixed assets. So, other important things, we do use skilled and accredited assessors. Why did we do this? Maybe no surprise to you, but for some stakeholders, this is a bit of a surprise, that assessments actually require quite a lot of skill. We tested this. Even semi-skilled assessors made such substantial errors that ratings would be 1 or 2 stars wrong. It is absolutely critical that if 2 assessors walk into the same house, the householder will get the same rating. If you don't get that, you undermine the entire program. It is important that there are quality checks and penalties. Everybody gets slack over time. They need to know, assessors need to know there is a a comeback if that occurs. Our accreditation hurdles, which we established with consultation with stakeholders, are actually really high. So we even have a real exam, and every assessor is audited regularly. There's also support, so we're not just throwing assessors out there and saying, do everything perfectly. There's ongoing support and skill development. If we're seeing certain errors recurring, we will provide support to fill the gaps in their learnings. And we're always asking for feedback from the assessors on how to improve the program. The certificate is the core communication with the householder. That's what they'll look at 3 months later when they've forgotten the detail. And won't go into huge detail. You can review these certificates later to look at all the depth in that. But a couple of things to pull out. Note it's the overall rating, which is cost to run the home for an average householder. 10 stars, essentially at 0 cost. The average home is set at 3 stars, and there's a little arrow so people compare themselves to an average. Why did we do this? A lot of technocrats don't like stars and don't like the way we're doing this. Well, it's because it's about the consumer. The consumers are absolutely clear that all they wanted was stars. They wanted to be intuitive. They wanted 10 stars. They wanted 10 to be 0 energy consumption. Didn't matter what else we gave them. Focus group testing said that's all that they want. That's the only thing that they felt was a way to communicate performance. So a couple of other pull-out points. We actually have a hot weather and a cold weather rating. This is how the home performs if there is no cooling in summer and it's hot, or no heating in winter when it's cold. Many reasons why this would be. Maybe nothing installed, maybe the power's gone out. It's also an indication of how much energy would be used to run that heating or cooling. So we found this was critically important for many, many reasons. We're finding even Victoria, which is a fairly cold climate, where this program started, actually the hot weather performance was sometimes the worst and the most problematic for householders because we have not developed our houses for that. There's also upgrade advice, improvement options provided, as you can see there. So we don't just say your house is poor, we say here's how you can fix it. Okay, we've also got a rating. This is the overall star rating, but it's varied with and without solar PV. This was very important because there's always that trade-off, isn't it? Do you solar PV your way out of trouble in your house? But if your house is actually going to be really uncomfortable, your rating might be high because your energy cost is low. But if it's uncomfortable because you've used lots of PV, it's important. So we've got that rating. We also, the certificate, we're on the second page here, rates the main elements that generate the overall rating. So what drives the energy costs. So the assessor and the householder can pick through and say, oh, actually, my heater is compared to best in class, it's actually really poor. So I know that's one I can improve, but maybe my lighting is on the other end. So it shows exactly where you can improve and how to improve. Note also the assessors can click a little button that says, I want this house to transition to all electric. And that means all the recommendations will be in transition to electric. So there won't be any advice to put in a gas appliance, for example. Also, we've got a few other things. This is hidden on the back of the certificate for good reason. There's some very small font there you probably can't read that says what is the overall energy use and the overall emissions with and without solar PV. This is because when we developed this, we found that some people were very sensitive to the word greenhouse and felt a little bit pushed, but some people were desperate, particularly researchers were really wanted that data. So it's there, it's not shouting, but it's there. So you can see how the house is performing with emissions, clearly on the certificate, which is particularly banks wanted to support lower interest loans. We've also got other additional features, which you've got batteries and shading plants on this example. So these are the gold elephant stamps. So they're not part of the rating, but they're things that people really, really want to be able to communicate. Maybe when they're selling their house, they can go, actually, I've got a battery and look, the government certificate shows it. It's a real thing. So an important additional features box that people find useful. More interesting things. These are things we're simply going to skim over. We can always have questions or other presentations on these. how the assessors are trained, how the assessors are audited, how we have standardized the processes so assessors gather the same data in the same way, how that data is then stored, privacy protected and shared, and our methodology of clarifying but not preventing assessor conflicts of interest, because we found householders actually wanted to be sold things. They didn't want a rating, and someone walks out the door and says, okay, you just go find someone you trust to do that insulation draft proofing and hot water system upgrades. They frequently wanted a referral, and as long as they knew that the assessor had a financial relationship, they can make that choice whether they want to take that referral or not. Interestingly, all of these aspects were much more complex than we originally envisaged, but they are all critical to make the scorecard work. So another thing that was critical and something we didn't realize was going to be quite so important is the communications products. Almost as important as the technical, which was a bit of a shock to our technocrats. So also, we aren't trying to train people to be technocrats. What we want them to do is to get the right advice from the skilled assessor. That's the whole point. So how do you get that message across? We found the tone had to be fun and engaging, not preachy and not educative, but more like, I now can comfortably go and get a scorecard assessment. We had, you might think we had a big budget. We had a minuscule budget, so we had to be very clever with our marketing and comms, and being fun and engaging was part of that. If you had fun stuff, people will share it. If you're preaching to people, they've seen that from government, they switch off. So we've got a website which does have a, it's the, if you like, the hub for finding things. We are really keen on our social media channels because that's where people spend their time. And we have a whole lot of videos. So you can see 25 fact sheets, 16 videos for target audiences, and a further 21 short videos created for social media. So you can see each one is targeting a specific audience, down from the householder who knows nothing, we just want them to go and get an assessment, and up to what would a local council or a builder need to know to use the scorecard. So to give you a flavour of this, with technology supporting us, take a look at this video for householders.
Don't think we're getting sound, guys.
Excellent.
And that's just me. Turn it up.
Apologies. According to this side of things, we are sharing sound, so I'm not entirely sure where the disconnect is. What we might do is at the end of the presentation, we'll pop all the links in the chat, and you can follow up then. Our apologies. This is not how things usually run, but April is doing an amazing job. So we'll just keep moving on.
Okay, so I recommend that one, that video. It's only 1 minute of your time, so take a look at. We've had local councils sharing videos on endless loop in their waiting room because they're fun and they're useful. There's something a council is comfortable to share because we're not preaching and we're not advertising, and we're a government. Scorecard is fully government funded and run, so they know there's no vested interest. So take a look at that video with 1 minute of your time. So other fun things about Scorecard. Well, there's a really fascinating project which may resonate in New Zealand, certainly does in Australia, is that ratings are not just about energy efficiency. We have bushfires, storms, floods, cyclones, heat waves, and this really impacts on the housing stock. Now, quite a lot of the assessment is consistent across these things. So there's a lovely project that we're part of that is looking at, can we have a resilience rating system where we have a standardized national rating for all of these things. So Scorecard is the energy efficiency part of that. That program's to be launched nationally next year, and much of that is already operational. So there's all sorts of work on that one, and it's very exciting if we could end up with a rating that could help households not only be more comfortable, but less likely to lose their home. And you can imagine the interest of insurers and financiers. And some more fun things, the Healthy Homes Project. So that's that study I mentioned where we fast followed New Zealand and looked at, with health impaired people, if they upgraded their home on average by 1 scorecard star, did they reduce their healthcare costs? So it was being statistical. Therefore, the study had to be very targeted. So they tried to see if there was a signal over winter in Victoria, so cold, one of the colder climates in Australia, of whether the healthcare costs reduced. They found that $887 per person over 3 months of winter were saved in healthcare costs through broadly one scorecard star upgrade. So that's amazing. You may be aware that the UK uses their home rating system, as the equivalent of how they work out whether people are vulnerable, so energy vulnerable, because they've tried many things and found that one was the most useful. Okay, energy savvy upgrades. So another project using Scorecard targeted people who not self-nominated as being energy vulnerable. When we targeted renters, which traditionally we've never reached, we found one tranche of this project could actually deliver to 42% of its delivery was to rental households. This was a co-payment. So this meant government paid broadly half the cost of an upgrade and an assessment, and the landlord paid the other half. So you imagine how hard that is, but it shows with a robust rating tool and a good assessor, you can convince landlords that this is worthwhile. And we found that participants said their health was improved through the upgrades, even though that was not part of the requirements. There's also another report, and so that there'll be a report on that project being published soon. There's another report coming soon, which is called Improving the Energy Performance of Homes in Australia, which summarises some learnings that we've got out of the plethora of scorecard projects to date. And we found that you can convert householders from assessment to upgrades in about 75% of the case. It's 75%, which is quite remarkable. Like many programs, you do an assessment and nothing happens. But when well run, most people will be convinced to upgrade their homes. Another important learning is that different built forms have very different upgrade needs. So if you're not doing proper assessments, you're not giving people the upgrades that they need. So very critical if you want cost-effective upgrades, and this reduces your overall program costs. Very quickly, that analysis found there were 4 key things to make programs work. None of them are really a surprise. We have to prioritise householder trust. We have to show that it works. We have to minimise pain points. That's very critical. No point giving ratings and then walking away and giving all the pain of upgrades to the householders, for example, of one of the many pain points. And we must have accurate, comparable information. Otherwise, people do not change. Okay. So what's in the future? Well, there's lots of things in the future for Scorecard. Those reports with some key learnings will be coming out soon. What might be top of mind for you is, could the scorecard be used in New Zealand? And the answer is yes, it could be. So we developed a scorecard for the state of Victoria with the assumption that other states may well want to get on board. We were right. So now the tool developed only for Victoria is now used all over Australia from the scorecard team. So it meant a lot of savings for those governments. They did not have to reinvent the wheel. They looked at the scorecard, went, okay, as long as you've got your climate zones in, you've tested it and piloted it, good to go. And now they're all funding. So all jurisdictions in Australia fund the scorecard. The potentiality to increase that to New Zealand is certainly there if there is interest. We're very happy to talk to people about that if there's an interest. Okay, question time.
Vicky, do you want to share this?
Yeah, thank you, April. That was really interesting, and I knew a bit about the scorecard, but certainly learned a lot more. And I think it's a fantastic initiative. Well done to you guys. If people either want to raise your hand and unmute yourself and take yourself a video, or post in the chat, I'm happy either way to take questions. Gareth.
Thanks for that. And I've got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to be a little bit careful which one I ask, I guess. So my first one, you talked about data being really valuable for researchers and what have you, and that clearly makes sense from my point of view. How is the data valued in the sense of the assessors and the various organisations that are doing the assessment and gathering the data? The researchers are using it. How does that data get paid for, I guess, in terms of enabling everybody to access and develop it in a at least a cost neutral way?
Good question, Gareth. Currently, so assessments have a cost, obviously, because the assessor's collecting data and that has a cost in time. Depending on the project, that cost is covered in various ways. So if it's a research project, that would be part of the research costs. If it's a householder getting private data, obviously they cover it. And in Victoria, we're going to have a government subsidy for that. So obviously the assessment has to be paid for. That data then goes into a database in the cloud where we have access, the scorecard team has access and can run queries on the whole database or subset, any query that is, can pull out subsets of data. This can be privacy protected, so remove, for example, identifying information such as addresses, because that is problematic. Households do sign a form that allows the data to be used for research, but not to expose their private data. So it's a case-by-case basis. Do we charge? At this point, we are not charging for extracting data. We have warned some entities who wanted quite extreme data extractions that if they want that, we'll have to consider charging, because obviously there's a cost. We're a very leanly funded project, so we don't have infinite capacity to do data queries, but we like to enable research where at all possible. So we're trying to work where possible, not charge for access to data. So does that kind of answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the answer is it depends. But how much does an assessment cost if it's unsubsidized? So I'm assuming the homeowner is the one that pays most of the time.
Yes. Okay. So the cost is driven by complexity of house and travel time. So if the house is not very complex and the travel time is low, probably 300 Australian dollars. If the house is highly complex and the travel time, could be double that. What else would drive cost? So, some particular cost could be high. So some people actually use it to do a massive renovation. So they'll get the assessor to sit down with an architect or a building designer to redesign their house. And, that could be $1,000 Australian dollars in that case, because that's lots of time. So it's a time-based cost, really. That's where the cost comes in.
Well, thanks. I'll let someone else ask a question.
Thanks, Gareth. We've got a question online from Phil. Can you feed in energy costs to determine annual running costs for the home? This is important for us to determine if a house is affordable to heat or cool, to maintain 18 degrees and use basic appliances, lighting, hot water, etc. Total cost combined with income per household gives a UK-style energy hardship qualitative rating.
Okay, good question. So I'll see if I'm answering what you really asked. So the overall rating represents the cost to run that house for an average householder, because it has to be comparable between houses. So there is an energy cost sitting in the back, which is an average energy cost. So in the back of the tool is an average energy cost already in there. Now, does that represent the actual bill of a householder? Well, of course, the answer we all know is depends, doesn't it? So if you're, running an arc furnace in your back garden, that will be obviously not representative. If you have 10 people over to stay, it will not be representative. If you're a super conservative, it won't be represented. So obviously there's all the subjective variables of how people do with their house, which a scorecard deliberately doesn't include, because comparability of objectivity is key. So as soon as you add in something like how many showers do you have as a subjective variable, might be important for like measuring a correct, if you like, energy bill for that householder. Also, it is often wrong or leads itself to scamming. For example, if you want to get a better rating, I'm a real conservative. Oh, look, my rating's better. So we deliberately, the purpose of this is comparability in average householder, because that's the most useful piece of data. So if your question is, can it represent a real bill? Well, yes, it can. That's what the assessor is there for. So they could say, look, this is an average household. This is a rating for an average household, but you have remarkably 10 people visiting you. For some reason, your bills will be higher than this because obviously you're consuming more. So cost is certainly in there, and the variables are dealt with by the assessor on the ground. So they can look at that particular household's, if you like, subjective variables to give the advice that suits them. So for example, you're in a wheelchair, you spend all of your day in your bedroom with your air conditioner on to survive. Therefore, we're going to focus on the performance of your bedroom. This is what we need to do, even though the rating is for an average householder. So that's how that bit's managed. Now, does that actually answer your question, Phil?
Welcome to unmute yourself if you want to, Phil, if you can. I think we might have lost him. By unmuting, he might have somehow left.
I hope he got an answer to his question.
I think he would have.
Yeah, no, he's still there, just couldn't unmute, but you answered his question. All good.
Great. Sorry. Yes, all good. Another question online. We have, are the emissions figures for a particular house based on the published electricity emissions of the specific electricity provider chosen by that house owner, or are they based on an average emissions figure for the whole state grid? Asking because I'll keep going. Asking because in New Zealand we have a certified carbon neutral electricity provider, Ecotricity. So choosing that provider makes significant difference to a particular household's emissions compared to the grid average. Yes,
good question. Where we dive into the differences between the Australian and New Zealand grid. So probably the easiest way to answer this is, if a household has paid extra to go greenhouse neutral through their provider, how is that represented? The answer is it is not represented, because it's also classified as, if you like, a subjective variable that could be scammed. So if today I am going with a green retailer and I'm 100% carbon neutral and I get my rating done, wow, I get a really good rating. If tomorrow I move to a different provider, my rating is immediately non-valid. And we expect this rating to be used at point of sale, point of lease, where almost always the energy retailer changes. So we deliberately do not include this because it is a variable between retailers and there is no control. Anything you could change today, tomorrow is an open door for someone to scam a rating. And the real purpose of this rating is to try and make it as scam-free as possible, because we know any rating that is debased, people will not trust. So no, it is not included. And I guess, does that matter? We could have a policy discussion on that, but I don't think it matters, because we don't necessarily want to renewable energy our way out of emissions, do we? Like, it is actually good to save energy no matter the source. So if we can reduce energy consumption, even if it is 100% renewable, that has benefits, which we can debate, but I think they're probably clear to the people on the line here that, you know, putting aside comfort, which obviously improves under energy efficiency, but reducing overall consumption from the grid has grid benefits, and it's probably the way society needs to go. So good on people who have 100% green power, but it's not included for clear policy reasons.
Thank you, April. Another question online. Is there support to grow the assessor base, i.e. growth of the programme highly dependent on how many assessors you have? Government, philanthropic or commercial investment? I think it meant is growth of the programme highly dependent on how many assessors you have?
I didn't quite catch that. So it was for the assessors.
So is there support to grow the assessor base? So is the growth of the programme dependent on how many assessors you have?
Yeah, another really good question, actually. So it's a classic chicken and egg situation. So we have found currently a voluntary program nationally. Assessors, there are always assessors who get accredited because they just love sustainability. So we have a good pool of very strong assessors. And the next iteration is, if there is a business opportunity for me, I will get accredited. And as soon as business opportunities arise, so New South Wales state government currently has a massive program. We've had a massive influx of New South Wales assessors because there's a work opportunity for them. Whereas, for example, Northern Territory has no active programs. We're not getting much interest. So people are smart. If there's work in it for them, we get a lot of assessors. If there isn't, there isn't. And there's not much point funding assessors unless there's work, because they need to use the tool and do work to keep up to date with it. So it's chicken and egg. What we try to do is make sure assessors can get accredited quickly when the work arises, and try and foreshadow in areas. If work is coming, we'll put out onto our email list and our networks and say, big projects coming in New South Wales, tell your friends who might want to get accredited, come and get accredited. We found if we fund people when there's no work, they get accredited and they sit around going, where's the work for me? So chicken and egg, what we really need to do is build both sides together. It's, you know, tricky, but doable.
Makes sense. And as Gareth said, he's had to go, but he'll be in touch by the sounds of it. Thank you. Another question online. I think we're okay till 2 o'clock. Do recommendations also indicate their impact on carbon emissions or health? For example, if someone wanted to prioritise based on these rather than financial?
Yes, and that's what, again, why accredited skilled assessors are critical in the program. So what our expectation would be is, so assessors can deliver any service. So let's say they're doing a project where their objective is to improve health or reduce carbon emissions rather than simply cost. The assessor is that joined to make sure that happens. So, for example, fortunately, the costs and emissions currently correlate really well for all jurisdictions in Australia. So things which reduce costs, so improve your star rating on your house, will also correlate to reducing your overall emissions. And we also have measured the emissions on the back end. So what an assessor can do is, if your house has a certain level of emissions, they can run a variant. They go, if you improve these things, the actual certificate will recalculate the improvement in emissions. So they can talk to householders, or indeed, if it's a research project, use that in a research project to drive their upgrades or their advice. Health, ditto. Now, health, interesting, depends what impacts on health. So often it would be the hot and cold rating, which would be the critical ones there. So hot weather rating, how well does this house perform with no cooling in a hot spell? That we know has really big impacts on people. Ditto the cold weather rating. How well does this house perform if you have no heating or it's not working for some reason? Again, we know that has health impacts. So those, could be used to drive, and we have recommendations to improve those ratings. So they could be used to drive a project to improve health, or other things as well. You know, obviously if draft proofing comes up as a really big, it's a drafty house, that's going to be an important activity to upgrade for health. I think that probably answers your question, which is yes, you can certainly use the data coming out of the tool in a plethora of ways, and health and emission reduction are quite doable and have been used for that specific purpose in projects.
Thank you, April. One more question online from Gareth Gritton at DEECA. Good to see you here, Gareth. Can you give a sense of the complexity of the model that underpins the star rating? Is there some sort of building thermal model in the calculation, or is it based on more of a lookup database approach? Good question.
Yes. Okay. So one indicator of a complexity is the base engine fell off the back of a spreadsheet, i.e. it's too complex for a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets, and we built the original model on a spreadsheet, and we soon found that the complexity of the modeling is beyond the capacity of a simple spreadsheet at all. So it's sitting on the cloud in a program form. It is if you like, a correlation to a Natta's thermal performance in the back end. That's the heavy lifting. So, you know, would assume almost everyone on the line would know Natta's thermal performance modelling done by CSIRO. So a very, very complex model of thermal performance. It's not that complex. It's not, because as anyone who's run the Accurate tool, or one of the variant tools that uses that, is you need extremely granular data to get that level of thermal performance modelling. So it's correlated to that and simplified with the data that is available accurately in existing homes. And that's the hard bit to do. So for every piece of data collection has a cost to the assessor, which is a cost that's passed through to the assessment costs. And in existing homes, some data is simply really hard to find. So what a lot of the technical development is, what data can be objectively and accurately collected that can go into primarily a thermal performance model, because that's where the rubber hits the road in complexity, as you would all be aware. If you can work out the thermal performance of the home, all you need to do is add heating, cooling, hot water, lighting. There's not much other things that you need to add, but the thermal modelling is the hard bit. So that is, if you like, not as complex as Natta's full thermal performance model, but correlated to that, and actually quite difficult. You know, it's certainly not a checklist or a lookup table, vastly more complicated than that.
As an indication, April, how long, obviously it depends very much on the house, but how long on average would a scorecard assessment take, just to give an indication of the volume of data you're collecting?
Okay, so a good skilled assessor should be collecting data, maybe 3/4 of an hour in the home, for an average home for a skilled assessor. So they have to go into every room, go around the outside, find the appliances. They're measuring windows and walls, looking at material type and draft proofing, critically important, ceiling insulation, going up in the ceiling, taking a look there if it's possible and safe. So yeah, probably about 3/4 of an hour to an hour. There'll be a little bit of off-site work, checking the relative performance of appliances, sometimes online, to make sure they've got a good rating and understanding of the performance of appliances. And they're also taking photographs of key elements, which is really critical. So some things are photographed and they upload the photographs. The brilliant thing about that is it makes auditing really straightforward. So we can look at photographs and check, say, the nameplate of the hot water system to see if they've cheated or accidentally entered the wrong one. So we can audit those, and it's also brilliant for research and other purposes. We've got some really accurate, precise photographic evidence. It takes a little bit longer, incredibly important piece of data to have. You know, they could be uploading 10 or 15 photos for some homes.
I'm conscious of the time, so we are going to have to wrap up, sadly, but as expected, I think we've probably just scratched the surface of what's an incredibly exciting and interesting program, and great to see there is lots of interest here. So we'll keep talking and maybe organise more talks or connect people directly. So Sean, I'll just hand back to you if you like, just to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, April and Sophie. It was a fantastic talk. And so I just want to say thanks on behalf of OERC. There's lots more to talk about here, and maybe we can certainly pick this up again in our symposium at the end of the year. Also want to thank Vicky at Brands for partnering with us to make this the first of our symposium seminars kick off with a really good start. So thanks very much. And thank you all for listening, and pay attention to your emails for details around the next seminar. I don't remember the details off the top of my head,
And
but there is something planned.
Links in the chat to those videos as
Yes.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll put that alongside the recording of this video up on our website as well. Thanks for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.